Hello, and welcome to Message in the Middle with Marianne. We all know that life is hard, right? It's messy, it's unpredictable, but it can be wonderful all at the same time. My hope is that we can take a deep dive into self-development topics and explore life's lessons through book clubs, conversations, and interviews. And together, we can uncover the lessons that others have already learned to help us navigate this crazy, wonderful ride called life. Hello and welcome to Message in the Middle with Marianne. Today I'm super excited to be able to bring you a conversation with Matty Lansdown. Matty's located in beautiful Australia. I'm jealous. He's a scientist, nutritionist, and a very successful podcast host, and a health coach that specializes in weight loss and self-confidence for professional women and busy mothers. Thank you, Matty, for joining me today.
Thank you for the invite. I'm really excited to chat with you.
Me too. So normally I kick things off by asking my guests to sort of give a little bit of their backstory and where you came from and how you got here. And yours is very interesting. You guys offline, I called him a bit of a nerd, and you'll understand why in a minute. But can you share with my listeners where you came from and kind of how you got into this niche?
Yeah, sure. So I guess I started in the countryside with my family. Mum was a nurse, and I used to go to the hospital with my mum every day, essentially as daycare. There wasn't a daycare part of the hospital. I literally just ran around the ward at the hospital, hanging out with sick and old people and dying people. And little Matty, loved it because I was getting all this attention from all of these people. I was learning how to knit. I was learning how to play poker, play pool, like all of these things. It was such an amazing time of my life, just with all of these old people around me, imparting knowledge and wisdom and experience. And I think that's an important part of the story because it meant that I had developed a really strong belief system that Western medicine and the hospital system was amazing because I had such positive memories from such a young age. And it obviously had nothing to do with my own wellness, sickness, disease, anything like that. It was just a great place. And so I then grew into a bit of an athlete as a teenager and then moved to the city for my research and study, where I became a scientist and I worked as a molecular biologist in a few different industries and then ended up sort of in the cancer system. So working in a cancer hospital as part of a cancer team. And that was really the area of life, I guess, or the area of my career that really sort of pushed me to where I am now because there was a lot of things that I realized working in the cancer hospital that seemed to be really logical to me that were not very logical to the system and the doctors that I worked with. And after I started my job there, I went to the World Health Organization page and thought, I need to learn about cancer. So I started, what is the World Health Organization telling the world about cancer? And in the first sentence of the cancer page, it said, and this is almost 10 years ago now, but it said 90 to 95% of all cancer is created by diet, lifestyle, and tobacco. And I was just naively in my early 20s, and I was like, why doesn't the hospital do that then? It seems like a really logical thing to ask. And I asked my professor, who'd been, doing this stuff for 40 years, and he just kind of laughed at me and was like, Matty, if it was that simple, we would have figured it out already. And so what that began for me about 7 or 8 years ago was a research path outside of my research job about the history of the cancer business, the history of Western medicine, the history of the big pharmaceutical companies, and the way that incorporates into the education system, the government guidelines for food and nutrition and drugs and all of these different types of things. And unfortunately, many of the truths that are there for everybody to go and find, they're not really conspiracies. They're all recorded in publicly accessible stuff is really quite dark. The reality is it's all just a big business. That doesn't mean to say that there's not utility. I think there's great utility in Western medicine. I think the problem is that we use a system that is designed to help you get back up on your feet. And then you should then go and change your diet, your lifestyle, and all of the other things. But people use it as the last resort. It's like, I don't have to take responsibility or ownership. I just have to go and get these pills for my problem, and I'll be fine. And obviously, everybody that's ever been sick knows that just taking the pills never made you fine. You just continue suffering, on this baseline of pain and discomfort for the rest of your life, and effectively spend 10, 20, 30, 40 years in the dying process, which is, what's the point if the quality of life deteriorates over that time, right? So all of that to lead me to the point of becoming a nutritionist. And being like, no, food nutrition created many of the problems here. And I'd like every day that I would walk through the clinic at the cancer hospital, visibly everybody's obese, overweight. And so I thought, maybe if we can solve that problem, then people won't, have the diabetes, or they won't have the cancer or the Alzheimer's or whatever it is. And so I started giving lectures on nutrition and running retreats and this type of thing. And I did it in multiple countries, only to realize that everybody already knew what to eat. I was like, everybody already knows that meat and vegetables and fruit and nuts and seeds are all good ideas. Why aren't they doing it? And that led me to what I do now, which is I really work on the psychology of health transformation and behavior change, because everybody knows that I help people now answer the question, why can't I eat the healthy food, basically?
You talk about it not being about the food they're eating. It's like a peeling the onion journey, right? I think you said something like that on your webpage. And that it's about growing a new version of yourself. It's not just go on a diet or change this one thing. It's much bigger than that. And so, what have you seen, and sort of what evidence is out there, and how does that inform the way you operate with your clients?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think like just the simple fact that probably everybody listening knows what to eat. Like we could probably all sit down together without asking each other and write a list of 100 things in our life that we could be doing better by just making a different choice, not by going and getting different resources, not by spending loads of money, by just making a different choice when we get up, by making a different choice when we interact with that person, by making a different choice when we go to the supermarket. And we all know this stuff, it's just really, it's a sign of the privileged world that we're in, that we can know this stuff and don't have to do it and we'll still be okay. And that's a real sign of wow, life must be pretty easy if I can choose the worst possible thing for my health and still be okay. Which is also equally the reason that we don't change, right? Is that from a brain chemistry type standpoint or an evolutionary biology standpoint, is that when we have a situation where we're living, we're alive, even if it's not good for us, our nervous system and our brain says, well, we've lived this way for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years and we didn't die. So let's keep doing that, because the devil we know is probably better than the one we don't know. Even though consciously we know making a different choice would probably produce a better outcome, would probably make us lose weight, it would probably help us with that illness. We don't know. That's a huge risk. And so the evidence we've got is that we've lived this far in this situation. And there's three things that it really speaks to, and that's certainty, security, and predictability. And knowing all three of those things is what our nervous system prefers, because if it can predict the environment, then it can predict the likelihood that we will live. And we all want to live consciously and unconsciously, right? So the idea of risking peeling that onion or stepping outside of your comfort zone is a risk. And conventional diets and many conventional approaches to, fixing disease are so extreme that they push you so far out of that familiarity. There's no certainty, there's no security, there's no safety or predictability. And so we often do use willpower for a couple of weeks to not eat the food or not do the thing or make sure we take the pills every day. And then once that's over, we just kind of slingshot back to who we used to be, because it's familiar and safe and calm and comfortable. So when we peel that onion, we really want to be slow. It's so unpopular and unsexy to say, lose weight the slow way, or get well over years. Nobody wants that, but that's at this point, everybody should know that that's the answer. Because they wouldn't be listening to this conversation if they knew that it could work another way. It doesn't work the other way.
I'm dying to interrupt because I call myself the turtle. I mean, most of these folks know that I've lost a decent amount of weight, and it took me many years. I've been on this journey for quite some amount of years at this point. And that's what I always said. It was just keep kind of plugging away at it because I wanted it to be sustainable and to create a lifestyle that could work, and I wouldn't just go right back. So it's so interesting to hear you say that. The other thing you made me think of was, do you know Elizabeth Benton? She wrote Chasing Cupcakes.
I know the book.
It's a great book. Check it out.
Okay.
So she says that every choice is a chance. And it made me think of what you just said, right? So every single day we have all these choices that we can make throughout the day. It's always, even if you make a quote unquote bad one, the very next one could be a better choice. It's a chance every single time to get it better. So that's what you just made me think of.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. I like that. Well, and that makes me think too, like a lot of people that need to go on any type of change, like a lot of people I work with, they identify as an all in or all out person. And a lot of conventional diets literally say, just don't be that person anymore.
Yeah.
They just, as if you're going to have some magical ability to not be yourself. Right. So instead of thinking like, all right, I've got to go this 12-week program, and then on week 13, I can finally return to being my old self. That thinking is going to set us up for long-term failure. And that's likely how you've done your whole life, because I very much believe that how we do anything is how we do everything. And so there'll be a pattern throughout your relationships, throughout your jobs, throughout anything you've got to do, parenting, everything that reflects this type of extreme all in and then extreme all out type of thinking. So instead of trying to get rid of a part of your personality that exists, like it's going to take a very long time to change that, if at all. So what we want to do is that exact type of thinking that you just shared, which is we want to go all in moment to moment.
Yes.
Like we're in front of, about to do dinner. Am I going to go all in with health with this dinner? And then after dinner, guess what? The system resets. And you can then ask, like, after dinner, what am I going to do? Or, you know, when I do this or do that, it's like moment to moment, every single situation, be like, am I going all in or all out on this particular moment? And then we build that momentum. And by the end of the week, instead of being like, the whole week was screwed up, it's like, actually, about 85% of the choices that I consciously made, I went all in on, and it was great.
I think that is such a hard concept for people to get. And we see, I think you just said it, like our whole lifetime, so many people, it's this cyclical thing of all in or all out, and finding that comfort in the gray, like being in that gray of, you don't have to be all in or all out. And once you do, what I've found, and some of the people that, you know, that are in this group have found, is that as you start building a different lifestyle or different habits, it doesn't even have to be about weight loss, is that as you start doing it more and more, you might still, again, make the quote unquote, I'm making air quotes, you guys, bad choices or wrong choices, but you recover faster. Like you recognize it, and then you can just regroup again and make a different choice the next time. And I think that's part of the evolution, right?
Yeah, totally agree with that. And I think as well, like people think if they're not all in, they fail. Like, and I would challenge most people to say, even the times you went all in, did you really nail it? Because a lot of people think like that's kind of their way to trick themselves into thinking that they tried. And which is, you know, an uncomfortable truth to talk about. But a lot of this stuff that we have to confront in our psychology is uncomfortable. That's why most people are jumping on the fad diets, or they're just trying the, you know, really easy parts, which is like restrict, or, you know, give up and binge. And it's like, no, I decided to quit. It's like, that might be an empowering stance, but it's not helping you, unfortunately. And so we have to really take ownership of the fact that, you know, going all in can actually be a self-sabotage strategy, because you've done it so many times that you know the all out is coming. The all out is coming, and it's just going to be another thing you tried one time that didn't work for you, when in actual fact, the approach that you took to changing your life is the problem. And so we need to change that, you know, entire mode of thinking about how we tackle problems and how we think about them. And that's for many people something they've never been introduced to. Like, how do I think differently? Or even the concept that I am not my thoughts. So that, you know, that can take a lot of people some time to really grapple with. It's like, hang on, I am not my thoughts. So what am I then? If I'm the thing that's thinking the thoughts. And so once you start creating space between your physical existence or your soul or your body, however you want to word it, and then being like, oh, these thoughts come in and they come out. And you can choose to engage with them, and you can choose to add stories to them that mean something or are helpful, rather than be driven by the information that you feel is being forced upon your mind in that particular moment. And I think that's really the starting place of getting control of your life, is realizing that every thought you have is not defining you. And the perfect way to exemplify that is, have you ever had a horrific thought? Like a really, really messed up thought about hurting somebody, or, doing something insane, even to the point where you're like, oh, I don't even want to think this. How do I get this thought out of my head? Like, that's the perfect example for you are not your thoughts, right?
Yes, I'm making a funny face, you guys. I've never had a thought like that. Of course not. That's a beautiful segue. I couldn't have paid you to say that, because within our private Facebook group, we're reading Dr. Amy Johnson's Just a Thought. And It's all, the whole book is around that thought, that it's really just a thought. And it's the stories we attach to our thoughts. And one of the visuals that I like is that thoughts are just clouds, right? They're just out there floating by. They float in, or the weather, they float in, they float out, right? But you don't have to engage with them necessarily. But again, it's a hard concept, I think, to get your head around.
Oh, totally. And it's one of those things, you can't go all in or all out on that type of thing, because once you know, you can't unknow. And so it's kind of like, there'll be a phase for people where they're like, oh, I know this is the case, but I don't know what to do with it. And then like you've obviously got to traverse that challenge, because there's an awareness phase where you just realize, I'm getting everything wrong. I'm now aware of all of my thinking problems and my thought patterns, and none of them are helpful. So, and we all kind of arrive there and spend a little bit of time there, and all of us, including me, regress there sometimes when life's too hard, or it's all overwhelming, or we didn't make a great decision. But learning to nurture that moment, so that we can then get back into the driver's seat, is really important, because otherwise that's a situation where people fall off the bandwagon for 5 years, or a relationship totally falls apart, or we ignore a problem that needs attention. And so it's uncomfortable, but it needs to be navigated.
I love that you said, get us back into the driver's seat. I think for me, that analogy of not letting the car drive itself or somebody else drive you, but getting yourself into that position where you're in control. I think that's a good analogy to think about. So one of the things that you talk about, I think or in a lot of the work you do, is emotional eating.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very interesting to me when I was looking at your website and doing some research around, you have this list of questions. Do you do this? Do you think this? Do you do this? And, I think it brings you to the conclusion that if you do some of that, you are an emotional eater. But I think what folks would be interested in, and they'll have to check it out, is that a lot of those things I think people typically wouldn't think of as emotional eating. And I know this is something you talk about. So I'd love for you to explain a little bit what you really think emotional eating is, and sort of, how we have to get in front of that.
Yeah, that's a big question. I like it though. I'm super passionate about emotional eating, because I think most people do it and most people don't know they're doing it. And just because of the thing you just mentioned, which is many of the things that are actually emotionally eating are things people would not identify as emotional eating. Like, do you eat at your desk? Do you eat whilst you're driving? Do you eat whilst you're on the phone, or you watch television? And a lot of people are like, how are these emotionally eating? And it's because what we're doing in those situations, if we're trying to do multiple things at once, we're distracting ourselves from an emotional experience that we're trying to avoid. So if you're on your phone, Netflix is on, and you're eating dinner, you're not present for any one of those events. You're trying to avoid a moment, an experience that you don't want to be present for, or that you don't want to deal with. And a lot of people use food to numb out, to avoid doing things. And it could be like you're working at the desk and you find yourself, you've gone to the cafe or you've gone to the cupboard, and it's kind of like, I'm not even hungry. Why am I here? Why is this happening? And I think that's the core of identifying it. Like, am I actually hungry when you're eating? And if you identify that you're not, we then have to peel the onion and figure out, well, why am I drawn to food? And for the desk example, a lot of the time that's procrastination. And if you peel that onion, it can come down to perfectionism. There's a task that I don't like doing, or there's something that I'm not very good at doing, and I want a distraction from this moment. And so we go and get the food, and then we come back with the food so that, again, we're not present. We're going to do the uncomfortable task whilst we are eating so that we can be like our body's more present with the food rather than the task that we don't feel good enough or perfectionist enough to be able to complete to a standard that we would say is okay. And this rolls on to like driving and eating and doing anything and eating, except maybe social situations. Like obviously we all go out for dinner and connecting over food is really important, but all of the unnecessary eating that comes from not actually being hungry. If we're eating when we're not hungry, then there's a couple of things going on. There's either emotional eating, there's either sugar addiction, or a lack of protein in the diet. All of those are usually happening simultaneously. So yeah, I think a lot of people don't identify as emotional eaters, but most of us are.
Wow. I think that's really good food for thought, no pun intended. But I just think, again, I think most people will really, if you really dig into some of that of what you just said, it's a little different. And I think that having that awareness really can help us level up and really understand what we're doing. I love that. So I want to ask you another thing that I saw out there. So I used your short bio when I introduced you, but in your long bio, it says you're super passionate about showing people how to level up in body and mind so that healthy habits and right food choices are easy and natural. That's the part I wanted to get to. So I think for most people that have been in the space of trying to do any work on whether it be wellness journey or even just, major habit changes or lifestyle changes, getting to a place where it's easy and natural, that's hard. That's hard. So tell me what you mean by that and how do you do it? What's the secret sauce?
Well, the secret sauce is predominantly long-term consistency to wanting to be better for yourself. And that comes under the banner of self-love and self-respect. And a lot of people haven't spent enough time, were raised in a family or have a family where prioritizing yourself is a good idea. And unfortunately, what we're seeing now in this generation of children is we're seeing a generation of children that will live shorter lives than their parents because the world is so toxic. But also we have, and this is why I work with mothers, we've got a generation of mothers that are trying to be everyone to everybody, which is not their fault. It's not your fault as mothers, but this is the world we've created. And so women are sacrificing themselves, literally sacrificing their obesity, their hormone issues, their menopause problems for their kids, which, if we think about it, like, post World War II, there was a generation of people that were like trying to give everybody everything because they went through such horrificness. And we're kind of in that generation or the next generation after that, where kids are like, we're giving them everything because opportunities, take all the opportunities. We don't miss anything. But the cost of that is that kids are living shorter lives. Like we've got mothers and particularly and parents that are embodying how to sacrifice your own health for everybody else. And so what that means is that the current group of children are going to grow up and be like 21 when they move out, or 25. And without thinking about it, and we all did this, all of us did this, we think, how do I look after myself in the world as an adult? We don't consciously think that. We just default to however my parents or my parental figures looked after themselves. And so that's why we've got, children that are being, diagnosed with what used to be, not that long ago, elderly person diseases. And so, because we've got these kids copying these parents. So what we need to do in order to level up is start, I guess, practicing the idea that self-care is not selfish. And in fact, you can actually show up and produce better results in your life with your health, in your relationship, in parenting, if you actually start embodying someone that cares about the vessel that you live in. Because if you don't, nobody else is going to care about it for you, and you'll just be a victim to the pharmaceutical system. And look, drugs help people from time to time, but they often create side effects which need more drugs, and it's just a bit of a spiral down the rabbit hole. So when we go mind and body, We both need to respect the person we are, the fact that we are a living, breathing human that deserves love and care and attention. We're not perfect, accepting that and giving permission for that to be true, but also the physical body. So in order to make healthy food choices natural and easy, we need to have the mind and the emotions supportive of creating a world where we respect ourselves by choosing the right food, because that nourishes the body. Because the liver interprets things in two ways: toxin or nutrient. That's it. It doesn't think, well, this person was sad, they broke up with their partner, and so, we'll make the chocolate cake basically kale this time.
Come
right?
on.
That's not how it works. So I wish it was different too. I love chocolate cake, right? So we need to have your identity, someone that defaults towards a decision that nourishes and builds the body. And then second to that is obviously knowing the actual nutrition to eat, so we can reprogram the microbiome. We can reprogram your nutrient receptors and your flavor receptors so that food becomes normal. Because I think a lot of adults forget, it takes 20 times for a child to get used to a new food, right? Whereas adults, we're like, oh, I tried that once and I thought it was terrible. I don't like healthy food. And it's like, if you were parenting your child to like broccoli, you would just keep giving the kid broccoli until the kid liked broccoli. So we've got to remember, we're really just giant drunk babies as adults. So we've got to nurture ourselves in the same way, right? So yeah, mind and body, we need to reprogram the biology, but we also need to reprogram the emotions and the mind and the way we see ourselves. Because if we don't, then we're just going to default to what our nervous system knows.
Yeah, I think I'm finding, especially in this age group, this demographic that I work with, is it's a time where a lot of us are at a point where we can start looking at our lives again, right? We got busy in that sort of rush of having all these hats like you talked about, and finally we have some time to look at it. And I keep asking everybody that I talk to, it's like, why do you think that women finally get a chance to sort of wake up in their, late 40s, early 50s, whatever? Because I really wish it could happen earlier. I really wish, right, that it could happen or maybe it doesn't need to happen at all. I wish we didn't lose ourselves in the first place. But, right, yeah, he just pointed at me, you guys. But ideally, that would be the case, right? We wouldn't lose ourselves at all.
I think a thing that I like to talk about, so the thing that got me into the way that I guess I guide people to eat is very much based on evolution. And so in my mind, it's like our genetics really haven't changed much in thousands and thousands of years. So for the very vast majority of human history, what did we eat and how did that make, our bodies and our I guess, responses to these different stimuli in the environment. And so I always default to like what worked for the first 100,000 years probably still works now compared to Twinkies, because Twinkies have been around for like 50 years. So at the same way of thinking, I think about all the women I work with, which are usually in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, and their hormones are shot. They've tried all these different diets. They've been like running on stress for the last 30 years. And so I'm like, okay, how did this come to be? Let's look into history. So the reality is for women that your hormonal profile is different. It's much more delicate and it needs a lot more relaxing and nurturing than a man does. And I know that we're going through this phase of moving towards equality and women wanting to show up in the world with the same intensity and be everybody to everything. And that's a great idea, but there's actually a hormonal cost to that, because for thousands of years, a group of women managed problems. Not one woman that was trying to help everybody do everything. It was like the kids would come over and it'd be like, oh no, Mary deals with that. Or no, that problem is dealt with by Margaret, right? And so, or the group of women together would share the stress and they would problem solve as a community. And so we don't really have that anymore. Like we're busier than ever, trying to be everywhere, trying to do everything for our kids and ourselves and our partner and our work by ourselves. But the reality is we're tribe animals, we're pack animals, and particularly for women's hormones, which, that's the reason we've got these epidemics of obesity and, hormone issues and all these problems. And we get to this point of waking up when the kids have moved out, because that's not how it's meant to be. We're not meant to fly solo. We're meant to be a community and a clan and a tribe and share the load.
It takes a village. That came from somewhere, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
All right, so I'm probably going to open a can of worms with this question.
I like worms.
I definitely have people interested in this topic, and I'm almost afraid to open this can of worms because it can be controversial depending on where it lands, but intermittent fasting. So I think you say that most people do it wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And that's my first, I guess, question, if that was a question. Tell me what you mean by that and why do most people do it wrong in your opinion? And then I probably have a follow-up question.
Yeah, sure. So the reason most people do it wrong is because they approach it like any other diet, which is like on Monday, we're going to go hardcore restriction. We're going to throw away all the things that we love about life. We're going to try really hard. And then trying really hard lasts a couple of days, a couple of weeks, maybe, if you're really lucky. And then you're back to square one doing the same, yo-yo that you've been on, which is that doesn't work for me. I tried it, didn't work for me. And so I guess the first red flag for anyone on any diet is if you have like a go day where everything changes, your nervous system's not going to be comfortable with that. And we kind of talked about that before. If you change too many things, your safety, security, certainty will be threatened. And so you'll be like, oh, I'm going to go back to what I do know. Even though I know it's not helpful, I'm going to go back there. So most people are doing it wrong because on day one, they think, let's go. The more fasting, the better. And so day one, they're like, oh, I didn't eat until 6 o'clock today. And then tomorrow they're like, oh, I only made it till 2 o'clock. And it's this idea that, yeah, it's a dial. And it's like, if we just dial it up further, we're going to get more benefits. And again, with female hormones is that if we're just adding more stress to 35 years of horrible stress, then it's obviously not going to be super useful or helpful. And so we really have to nurture the body through this, I guess, intermittent fasting tool. And we all intermittent fast every single day. As long as you're not eating whilst you're sleeping, you're doing some version of intermittent fasting. It's just a cycle between eating and not eating. And particularly for menstruating women, like it really needs to be a flow, which kind of matches the word, but like we need to go in and out of the way that we do it because there's parts of the cycle which really need lower stress, and we don't want to put more stress on the body. And when you fast or do anything like go to the gym, that's good stress, but it's still stress. So we need to, know the parts of the cycle that we should kind of push it a little bit further. And then we need to relax and make sure that we give the body what it needs and relax. And that's like pre-ovulation and pre-bleed week. So it's roughly weeks 2 and 4 should be the weeks that we relax and ease up a little bit. And doing things like that is how long-term weight loss should be done as well, because you can't just stay in a weight loss phase forever. You plateau, your body will adapt. And so I think following this kind of intermittent fasting for women's hormones model that I kind of have created is really useful for really long-term weight loss, because we go in and out every month of like weight loss into maintenance, weight loss into maintenance. And we're not demonizing any particular foods in the process. There's total permission to enjoy chocolate if you want it, because we're also working on the mind in that process as well. But I think deprogramming that kind of conventional diet culture is very important, because that's why we get a lot of diets wrong. We just go on day one, all in, change all the things, get really hungry, and it all falls apart. I've never met a happy, hungry person.
So it sounds like you do a more customized plan with people based on where they are, their age, their hormonal situation. Yeah. I don't know the right words, but it sounds like that. Well, then I don't know if you're going to be able to answer this question, because this was asked, somebody asked me to ask this. But is it true that intermittent fasting causes carb cravings?
Oh, great question. That's a really good question. So I think identifying where those carb cravings are coming from is more important than blaming the tool, because it could be, so carb cravings could be you're addicted to sugar, or you're addicted to a certain type of food, or it might be that food serves an important emotional purpose in your daily life. And so if you eliminate that, then there's this void. And that's a big part of the emotional eating work that I do with people, is like, we don't just eliminate all of these foods instantly. We have to first identify, why are these foods in my day that I know intellectually are not good for me, but I just can't bypass them. And so there could be a couple of answers for that, which is that they make me feel good, or they make me bypass emotions. I do them when I'm doing, like we talked about before, work that I'm not comfortable with. They fill a gap when I don't want to be with myself. That's a really big one, especially with wine in the evenings, is that like people get to the end of the day feeling tired, feeling like, life's hard. And so it's like, I'm just going to have a wine. And even though we trick our brain into thinking that we're rewarding ourselves for, getting through another day, it's really tied into a narrative that keeps us small and keeps us essentially not helping ourselves on a daily basis. So there could be an emotional issue going on with the carb cravings, that if you eliminate them, that now that emotion or that wound is now vulnerable. It's out in the air. And so eventually that will fall apart because you're not nurturing or replacing something that nurtured that emotion, initially with carbohydrates. So we need to come up with alternatives to fill that space and work through that challenge. And then I guess if we talk biologically as well and nutritionally, I think a lot of people think the same thing with intermittent fasting, like more is better. And then carbohydrates, like I very much believe low carb is a good approach, but again, it's customized to the month. So in week 4, all the carbs, we want to enjoy all of the carbohydrates. And by that, I mean vegetables, I mean, whole real food carbohydrates, but we want to nurture it that week. And that's the week for most women that they get their chocolate cravings, that they're more emotional, more irritable. And so that's also the week that by far most people give up diets, because all these feelings and cravings and hormones that are actually in your body come up, and you're like, oh no, the diet said I can't do this. So you end up doing it. You're like, I'm all out. That's it. I'm done. This didn't work for me. So we actually want to allow carbohydrates in there, because particularly for women compared to men, they're really important at managing the hormonal profile, the micronutrients that we get from carbohydrates. So I think low carb is good most of the time, but we need to know when to introduce those carbohydrates, because if carb cravings are coming up, there could be a nutritional deficiency that's being created, or an emotional situation that hasn't been recognized and dealt with.
Do you think postmenopausal women still go through these same hormonal, ups and downs, even though that they're past that period?
That's a good question. I think yes and no. So when postmenopausal women definitely can move to a more consistent flow with their intermittent fasting routine. However, we also, even though the hormones have changed, we have to recognize that your body went through 50 years of, or 40 years of having a cycle. So even though those hormones have kind of gone away, the impact of that, decades of monthly cycles and decades of hormonal fluctuations are still like in your body. The impact of that is in your body. So I think we still need to be more nurturing and not think, oh, I don't have a period anymore, so I can just go flat out, because it'll still cause stress to the body. And no doubt that body has been stressed for the last 40 or 50 years as well. So it's really about nurturing it and committing to the long-term weight loss or the long-term improvement of your health, and being like, I just want to show up in the world tomorrow as a healthier version of myself, rather than why don't I look like I was when I was 21 next week, basically. But yeah, it is a little different for postmenopausal women, but nurturing should be the approach.
All right, I got one last question for you, because I don't want to keep you too long.
Okay.
And you touched on it a little bit. I know that when you talk about addiction, being addicted to certain foods, whether it be sugar or carbs or whatever, a lot of people think addiction is this big overwhelming thing that takes over your whole life, and you can't do anything else, you got to have it. And that's not typically the same exact kind of thing we see with food. Well, at least it hides a little bit better. So can you talk a little bit about, when you say addicted, what does that look like to you, or what you mean by that?
That's a great question. And it's super tricky, right, with food, because we have to eat. Whereas with alcohol, we don't have to drink alcohol, or drugs, like heroin. We don't have to have heroin, right? So it's tricky with food, because you can go to a social situation, or even just to dinner at a restaurant, and be like, so that's bad and that's not, but it's all classified as food. So it's really kind of confusing. But to identify whether you're an addict or not, basically, can you go without a particular food? And if you go without it, do you have an emotional reaction? That's the important one. If you notice that after a couple of days of no wine, or a couple of days of no chocolate, or a couple of days of no, going to the cafe at break time to get a muffin, that you're starting to, that the weird things in your life are happening. You're starting to get irritable. You're fighting with your partner. You're not focused. You're not being able to focus very clearly, which interestingly was one of Coca-Cola's arguments against a sugar tax, because they said our workers won't be able to focus as much. Because I think you're looking at the wrong side of the problem. They're all addicted to sugar, right? So yeah, if there's a food or a group of foods in your life that you can go without any emotional consequence or like social consequence for you and your relationships and yourself, you're not addicted. But if there are foods that you go without and you start thinking about them, they haven't been around a lot, and you start really thinking a lot about them and planning your trips to the supermarket or figuring out like, oh, when can I next have that thing? There's likely an addiction going on there.
Good food for thought. This has been fantastic. And so thank you.
Thank you.
I want to point out to everybody, I'm going to put all your info in the show notes about how to get in touch with you. You have multiple Facebook groups. You have obviously Instagram and all that good stuff as well. Your website is full of information. You even have some freebies on there for folks if they're interested in them. And of course, you have this fantastic podcast called How to Not Get Sick and Die, just so I get that right. And it's really fun. It's got some great information that I think people will love. And you bring an interesting twist to it, a fun twist to it as well. So just want to point that out to everybody. And I will list this all in the show notes for you guys. Before I let you go, is there anything else you want to leave my listeners with? Any parting words of wisdom?
Parting words of wisdom. I would just say take ownership. That's the number one piece of life advice for every area of your life. Just start taking ownership. And yeah, at each moment, be like, how can I own my part in this story? Because if you don't take ownership of your own life, you just end up being a character in somebody else's.
Love that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Message in the Middle with Marianne. If you enjoyed the podcast, please take a minute to share it and write a review, as it helps bring new listeners to our audience. If you'd like to keep the conversation going between episodes, please join us at Facebook group Message in the Middle with Marianne.